Lesson 1.6 is on tables and graphs and how we can use tables and graphs to present information, to display data. So let's talk for a second about data. Data describes real-life situations. A lot of times when we're practicing problems in class or something like that, when we do our problems, the math and the points and the numbers all kind of line up perfectly. And that's not true in real life. When you go out there and you collect data, you collect real life data. What's happening? And it's not necessarily going to be perfect every time. But it means facts, numbers, basically any information. Any information is data. There is no best way to organize data. We don't have one way that we can say, oh, this is the way you should do it. But we have many different ways, and depending on the data you're given, depends on whether it's the best data or not. So data describes real life situations, and it's any information we can collect. Let's take a look at this graph. This graph is displaying some data. It's actually displaying, and I apologize, it's a little hard to read, but the number of voters and their favorite foods. So we have pizza, hot dogs, and hamburgers. Now, if you look at this graph, this bar graph, you would say, wow, the least favorite food is hamburgers. And it's not just the least favorite food, it's the least by a lot. Okay? But what we have to be careful of when we're looking at graphs is we've got to pay attention to certain things. For example, if you look here, our data starts at 950 and goes to 1,000. There's no bar break or anything that says that we skipped all those numbers up to 950. So this is what we would call a misleading graph. And it's misleading because of that compressed y-axis, because they didn't tell us that there is a bunch more numbers down here. Now, that might not be a big deal, or you might be thinking, why is that so important? Well, let me show you this. This is the exact same graph, except this time we start at 0 and go to 1,000. Hamburgers don't look quite so unpopular now. Yes, it's still the smallest, but when you think about it, we're talking over 900. Okay? A difference of 30 or 35, that's not a lot when you're talking about close to 1,000 people voting. Actually more than that, because it's almost 1,000 each one. So this is why graphs can be misleading, because we can skew data to present information any way we want. And so we have to be careful of that coming up to like our political season and all the political ads. We're not being lied to necessarily, but the data is being skewed. And so we have to be careful when we're looking at our graphs to look out for a few things, like missing bar breaks. That should have had a bar break there. And even if they did have a bar break, well, it might not be something we notice, so we have to watch out for the scale of our axes. Okay, you know, are they going by huge numbers, which is like making the data look shorter? Or are they going by a lot of numbers, which is making the data look really tall? And we also have to worry about the width in a bar graph of our columns. And these are just some things we have to be careful of. What we mean by that is when we talk about a bar graph, we're only worried about the height. And sometimes what happens, we're only worried about height, I apologize for the sloppiness of this, they might make things really wide and really skinny, and that makes us think something's bigger or something's smaller, when in reality it doesn't matter how wide they are, it's how tall they are. So that's why we had talked about before last year, when you make a bar graph, you make all the columns the same width. So these are just some of the ways graphs can be misleading. So be very careful when looking at any graphs and tables that data isn't being skewed to make you believe something.